Consciousness, consciousness, consciousness. It's like the ocean, the ocean, the ocean, the ocean. The H2O Network, purveyors of passion, seeking to expand human consciousness from the deep depths of the universe of your soul.
Greetings, family, and welcome to the H2O Network. Happy Friday. H2O seeks to explore and engage in truthful dialogue regarding human life, and water is the conduit. Water impacts every aspect of our existence, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. In today's connected world experience, access to information is almost limitless. Let us share our insight, broaden the spectrum of understanding so that we can move forward enlightened, hopeful, and willing to participate in all human affairs. Welcome, family. This is the H2O Network, and this is your host, Nunez, broadcasting live from New York City. If you'd like to call in, make sure that you call in to 917-889-7207, 917-889-7207. Make sure that you press 1 on your keypad. And also on the H2O Network profile page, if you go to the front under our shows, we have an RSS feed button and an iTunes button. You can listen to the H2O Network and everything that you've missed on the run as you're working and doing your thing. I am excited about today's show because, of course, we have Anthony Peake on, the foremost expert in consciousness studies, author, and researcher. But we're talking about this whole 11/11 phenomenon. And the song that I played at the beginning, Roberto y Gabriela, which is a song named 11/11. Apparently, this phenomenon of 11/11 has affected many people. And as a matter of fact, before we went on the air, I was speaking with Anthony about a new movie that's coming out on the burner called 11/11, lo and behold. So today, we are going to talk about this crazy, weird phenomenon of 11/11, and hopefully some individuals will call in who have actually written 2 books about this subject. What is 11/11? Is it something good? Is it something bad? Is it something that is opening the door to the demonic, or, whatever? I've heard so many things in perspective on this phenomenon, and I've experienced it myself. We're going to talk it out because who's to say who really knows? But it is El Bizarro, as I was stating before we got on the air with Anthony Peake. Are you there?
I certainly am. Yes, El Bizarro. What a wonderful term. I really like that. I will be using that continually from now on. I like it so much.
Well, I have to use that word today because 11/11 is truly El Bizarro, Anthony. That's the only way that one can describe it. And, people will say, okay, you've heard the whole story, and you go on YouTube and you hear all of these conspiracy theories. Well, I've seen 11/11 for a very long time before even anybody was really talking about it. So, the advent of technology allows you to connect with other people who have had the El Bizarro happen to them and tell their stories. So it's a fascinating subject. I love talking about it because you just want to hear what the many different perspectives of what people are thinking.
Absolutely. I mean, effectively, when I first came across it around about 4 or 5 years ago, I have to say that most people who know me will agree that I'm somewhat of a skeptic in these things, and I tend to take rather a rationalistic, scientific point of view, in the sense that my initial thought about this was, well, it's to do with the way in which the human brain seeks out patterns. Effectively, if you look at most sequences of numbers, the only sequence of numbers I can think of that just is a series of downstrokes is 11. So therefore, if we, as we have evolved, we have possibly developed an ability to spot certain patterns, and it could have been very much important in terms of survival. of the organism in times gone by, whereby being able to spot sequences. And indeed, if you look into the work of the Gestalt psychologists that were around in Austria and Germany around about 100 years ago, they would argue that pattern seeking is exactly what the human mind does. So that was my initial approach, to say, well, it is people who are keen on numerology making something out that is not out there. However, when the 1111 phenomenon started to manifest in my life, and it suddenly got beyond the point of just me noticing that 1111 was everywhere, but it was as if it was kind of messaging me in some way. The strangest of circumstances. For instance, one of the oddest of events that took place involved a series of emails I received. I've been reading up on 1111 a couple of days before, and then out of the blue, I received an email from a writer by the name of Marie D. Jones, who I'm hoping that maybe Marie could join us later, because she's over there in the USA. I know it's a vast country. I have this kind of small English worldview of distance, really. But I received an email from Marie, and I can't recall what the subject matter was now, but I received an email. And then within around about 3 minutes later, I received another email from a writer called Hilary Carter. Now, what is particularly odd about this is that when I started looking up about these two writers, something that linked them, they've both written books on 1111. And neither of them knew each other and was emailing me. Both of them were emailing me for different reasons. And yet suddenly here was a curious link that made me suddenly think, what's all that about? So I started to look into it in greater detail, and I started to find that the 1111 phenomenon was happening everywhere. And there were a whole series of odd circumstances that took place in my life. But it was one day when I was talking about this incessantly with people, and I was talking to my wife about it. And she said, well, 1111, there's something even more personal to do with you about 1111. And I said, what's this then? And she said, well, you're looking at it. And she pointed at my bookcase. Now, my book has been translated into various foreign languages. And it's been translated, my first book has been translated into, one of the languages was Dutch. And I looked at the title of my Dutch book, and it's called 111111. I just couldn't get my head around this. There's one thing saying that there's the phenomenon known as confirmation bias, whereby, you have a new car, and every time you're driving along the road, you see the same make of car. That's confirmation bias, or it's actually an attention bias, whereby your attention is drawn to the things that you're thinking about. And confirmation bias is when you're looking for coincidences and you see them everywhere. But this was subtly different. This was the title of a book that had been published. So it's not as if my attention bias was being drawn to that, because it wasn't anything to do with my attention. It also wasn't me looking for confirmation of 1111 anywhere, because clearly the words 111111 signify 111111. There's no other argument for that than that's what it was. Now, what is curious about 111111 is that in Dutch it means life after life after life. And I suddenly came to the conclusion, could this be some kind of message to me? Now, there's a great argument to say that a lot of quantum physicists argue that we all live within our own self-created universe, that the act of observation brings about the material reality around you. And again, if you look at some of the elements of neurology and everything else, there is a fair degree of evidence to say that this is the case. Something called the Copenhagen interpretation, which was suggested by Niels Bohr and a guy called Max Born way back in the 1920s, strongly suggests, or indeed shows, and has been shown by experiment time and time again, that particles, i.e. subatomic particles, are ordinarily waves. They are waves. But when they are observed or they are measured, they become a point particle. Now, everything we perceive around us is made up of subatomic particles, which effectively means that the act of observation brings about the reality or the building blocks of the reality around you. Therefore, it's not at all surprising that the world we see around us seems to reflect the way we're feeling. Sometimes the way the world is, that you feel down and everything seems to go wrong. Whereas when you're on a flow, everything seems to work out, everything seems to be there for you. It's almost like a version of, I don't know, the books that you read these days about wanting things and thinking about them, and they will happen to you. And this is because the reality around you is affected by you. So when you start seeing coincidences and synchronicities such as the 1111 phenomenon, you will see them everywhere. And in many ways, you are bringing about that reality because you're looking. Now, so what does 1111 mean to me? Well, if 1111 is a message to me, and for argument's sake, the message has a coded message within it, that coded message is that my overall hypothesis, which I call cheating the ferryman, which suggests, as you may recall, that we live our lives over and over again in a matrix-like recreation of our lives. 1111 for me has a coded message, which is life after life after life in Dutch. So could it message to me, and it's saying you're really on the right track, matey boy, and what you're trying to put across here is powerful. Now, there are people out there that have contacted me, and a lady contacted me on Facebook a couple of days ago and pointed out to me something called the midwayers. And I'd never come across this concept before. But the midwayers are, according to various writers on the 1111 phenomenon, are beings that are midway between gods or God and humanity. And they're spirit guides. And these spirit guides manifest themselves by giving messages, which is the 1111 prompt. So whenever you see an 11 prompt, it's because a midwayer is telling you to say you need to pay attention at this point because there's something significant happening, or to just catch your attention. Now, I'm not necessarily agreeing with that, but if you read my books, the one thing I do discuss is something called the daemon eidolon dyad. And in that I suggest that every human being has a higher self, a being that I call the daemon. And the interesting thing about the daemon is there's 70% of the population who are living their lives again in this recreation of our lives, a kind of groundhog life, if you want a better term. The daemon knows the future. Now, could the daemon be using the 1111 prompt as a function of being a midwayer to point you in the right direction of things that you think and feel and should be right? In which case, this suddenly wonderfully resonates with my overall cheating the ferryman hypothesis. Because so suddenly here we have another phenomenon that, I wouldn't dream in a million years would be linked in any shape or form with what I write about. But here is evidence that it could literally be, again, just another proof of the fact that cheating the ferryman has a degree of power, an explanatory power, in terms of so many phenomena that we come across. For instance, I would argue synchronicity is something that we notice all the time. And I have noticed that the synchronicities in my life, or as I term them, synchronicities, have got greater and greater and greater. And it seems to be building up, and it's building up for me, it's building up for you, it's building up for a lot of us. So could it be that our collective daemons, as we discussed last time, as I recall, our collective daemons are getting very, very worried about what's going to happen next. And we're being warned time and time again to be aware of something in the earth, something that's about to happen. Be interesting to have your comments on that.
I believe that to be true. And the reason why is because I have had dreams, if you will, for a very long time that are not so nice. And at first I'm like, okay, what's going on? Maybe I'm a little stressed out. But I would talk to other people and they would just happen to open up to me about the same things, highly respected elders in my tradition who are having the same things occur. And I find that to be quite interesting, and it is very much possible that it is a warning, if you will, because as we've talked about many times, the veils are very thin. And there are certain paradigms, if you will, that are bleeding into our own. I guess you could say, numbers. People are getting information more readily, more easily. And the synchronicities have always been there. We just have never really paid attention to them. So I think personally that it's a warning, if you will. And what's interesting about 11/11/11, from the New Age standpoint, if you will, I'm not a New Ager on many things, but it makes me ponder. Apparently during that date, a gateway is supposed to open up. Now, what do I mean by that? Is a gateway, a planetary gateway, if you will. If you look at this year, Anthony, a lot of alignments are happening that don't normally happen, and they've been happening for the past, I guess you could say, 10 years. But this year especially, a lot of unusual things happening in the skies. To me, there is no coincidence to that. For example, we had a supermoon, all of these like really strange lunar eclipses and, you know, planetary alignments. There's something to that. As there's an old saying in the occult called as above, so below. And we're all affected by each other. Our environments are affected against each other. So I perceive seeing the 11/11 as some type of spiritual warning, and as you just said, all of our daemons hooking up and tapping into this greater consciousness, if you will, and giving us, I guess you could say, a heads up. I mean, there are many different perspectives to look at this. It can also be seen as a program from the powers that be. I've heard people say that as well. There are so many different realities that are unseen to the layman, to the average person, if you will. And there is also the possibility that this could all be, I guess you can say, scammed to sort of kind of draw people in a negative type of sense, a controlling mind control type of sense, and that's a possibility as well. At this point, it's very hard to say, but I guess we'll just have to ride the boat to see what manifests. But the environment that we're in, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Anthony, there are a lot of crazy things going down in the environment and with people, right?
Yes.
So there's got to be, to me, there's something to this 11/11 phenomenon with consciously awake people and people on a certain path. That is spiritually relevant in a good way and not necessarily a bad way, if you will.
Well, couldn't we? We could posit the situation that, just as a very quick recap in terms of cheating the ferryman, what cheating the ferryman suggests is that if you have deja vu sensations, the idea that you feel you've been here before, this to me is evidence of a real reality, that in fact you have been here before and you have lived this life and you are existing in effectively a recording of the life that you lived last time round. But it's more complex than that, because I suggest that it's more akin to a super duper first person computer program. And within that computer program we all exist, and we all create that computer program, and we select the course of action within the program depending upon our actions. In other words, every action we make has a reaction, and every choice we make has outcomes. You know, and again, I keep coming back to the movie analogy of the movie Butterfly Effect, and the idea that whatever we do, it goes through. Now, what I've suggested is that there are, in the many worlds of politics, something put forward by a guy called Hugh Everett III in 1957. This suggests that there are literally trillions of universes, and there's trillions of dear Nunez's, and there's trillions of Anthony Peakes, all of whom have laid down within this super-duper computer program a life that they have lived. So indeed, a version of you will have already recorded every single outcome of every decision of your life. So within this huge computer program, which other people would call the Akashic Record, and indeed an associate of mine, Irvin Laszlo, does the science of this and suggests that this is to do with a substance called zero-point energy and a zero-point field. This contains all the information that is possibly available, and because we think about it in greater detail, effectively